Okay, so we're getting started pretty soon. Kemi, excited to have you be our moderator for today. So with that, I'll pass it to you and have you lead us in today's session.
Hey, fantastic. Hello and welcome everyone. Thank you so much for joining us for today's panel on Being Brave, Not Perfect, hosted by Young Women in Bio and Girls Who Code. My name is Kemi Akenzua. I'm a Girls Who Code alum from 2015 and a Harvard alum of 2020. And I have the absolute pleasure of moderating today's panel, featuring quite the lineup of impressive and inspiring female professionals in their field. Before we dive into our discussion, we'd love to share a huge thank you to both of our hosts, Girls Who Code and Young Women in Bio. I'll turn it over to Lily Wound, National Chair at Young Women in Bio, to share more about the organization and its wonderful impact.
Thanks, Kemi. My name is Lily Wound. I'm the National Chair of Young Women in Bio. We're a national organization. We have 13 chapters across the country and in Montreal. And we strongly urge young girls to pursue careers and other opportunities in STEM. We actually cover all of STEM, not just bio. And so we're really excited today. This is our first webinar with Girls Who Code, and we hope to do more. And Kemi, I graduated from Harvard as well, but I can't really disclose the year. I'll turn it back to you.
Thanks, Lily. Thank you, sorry. Thank you for giving us insight into Young Women in Bio. I'd now like to introduce Emily Ong, Senior Manager of Community Partnerships and Outreach at Girls Who Code, for a few words.
Thanks so much, Kemi. Once again, also excited to be here today. And thank you to our partners at Young Women in Bio for making this event happen. As Kemi mentioned, my name is Emily Ong. I'm the Senior Manager of Community Partnerships and Outreach here at Girls Who Code. We're the international nonprofit leading the movement to close the gender gap in tech and change the idea of what a programmer looks like and does. So we inspire, educate, and equip girls with the skills that they need to pursue 21st century opportunities. Through in-person and virtual programming, thus far, we've reached over 300,000 girls and young women all across the United States, Canada, the UK, and India since we were founded in 2012, and are proud to share that our 80,000 college-age alumni are majoring in CS, or computer science, and related fields at 15 times the national average, and our Black and Latinx alumni at 16 times the national average. So our real deep-rooted encouragement of our students to be brave, not perfect, was really started by our CEO and founder, Reshma Saujani. And so we're so thankful to have all of you as panelists today to talk about how our viewers can really ignite their own bravery to pursue their dreams. We also really strongly believe you cannot be what you cannot see. So I definitely encourage our viewers to learn from them, ask questions, and reflect on what steps that you too can take to be brave and resilient as you make a difference in your community. I'll pass it back to you, Kemi.
Thank you, Emily, for sharing more about the inspiring work behind the Girls Who Code movement. I've had the pleasure of being involved in Girls Who Code since 2015 when I participated in the summer immersion program in Los Angeles, California. At the time, I really only had experience in history and different liberal arts in high school, but my mom had seen, I think, an ad on CNN or something about Girls Who Code and thought it would be, a good skill to learn. I enrolled, got started, and spent honestly some of the best 6 weeks of my life at the program with 19 other young women who had a similar drive and passion as me, but not really sure how to direct it. Girls Who Code allowed us to find that outlet and to find that our other interests were actually complementary to coding and built each other up. So I am so thankful for my experience with Girls Who Code, and I'm certain I would not be where I am today without the organization. So without further ado, let us meet our three phenomenal panelists, very exciting. Today we'll be joined by Dr. Anna Greca, Institute Member and Director of Kidney Disease Initiative at Broad Institute, Rebecca Velez-Frey, Chief Operating Officer at Evolve Immune Therapeutics, and Melanie Dirks, Professor of Psychology at McGill University. They'll be sharing their insights and experiences for how they have been brave and resilient as female professionals in traditionally male-dominated fields. We'll start out with moderated questions, and we'll have time at the end for an open Q&A from audience members. Make sure to save your question and type them in the chat as you think of them. So to get started, we would love to have a brief introduction from each of our panelists. Can you please introduce yourselves and a little bit about your current projects? Starting out with Anna.
Okay, thank you for this very kind invitation. It's a really great pleasure to be here with everyone today. My name is Anna Greca. I'm an associate professor at Harvard Medical School and a physician scientist, so also a doctor at Brigham and Women's Hospital in Boston. And I'm an institute member, as you mentioned, at the Broad Institute, where I direct our kidney disease initiative. Basically, my career is a combination of mostly scientific research with a little bit of clinical work, as is the usual balance for physician scientists. I am a kidney specialist by training, and my lab is really focused on, understanding fundamental mechanisms about how things go wrong in cells, with a specific focus on kidney cells. But with a lot of opportunities to actually learn fundamental mechanisms that apply to many other cell systems. So at the present time, we have projects in the kidney, in the eye, and in the brain. We're also working in areas that have to do with diabetes. And the kinds of work that we do is both laboratory work, as you would imagine it in a classical sense, with test tubes and such in a lab setting, but also a lot of computational work. So my lab employs both people who do work at the bench as well as people who work on the computer. I really just want to emphasize that modern biological sciences and investigation is really a combination of all of these skills. And Girls Who Code, I think it's a tremendous opportunity in combination with people who are interested in the STEM biological sciences. This is a tremendous time to really be interested in these fields. And just as a little tidbit, I will say that I recently had an opportunity to count this. 65 to 70% of my lab is women. So I'm very pleased to be contributing in that direction.
Can we now hear from Melanie?
Unmute myself, and then I'm going to say I'm just trying to calculate what percentage of my lab is women. I think it's 5 out of 7 of my doctoral students are women. So I'm a professor in the psychology department at McGill University, which is in Montreal. So I think I'm representing for Canada today. And so I'm actually trained as a clinical psychologist. So I am trained as a therapist, although I don't currently practice. Like Anna, I spend most of my time doing scientific research. And then I also spend a significant amount of time teaching undergraduates. So I teach 2 big classes, one on typical child development and one on developmental psychopathology. So that's when things go, when kids have problems with emotions or with behavior, and helping undergraduates learn how we think about and how we study that. So my lab is really focused on interpersonal relationships and how that contributes to psychopathology, so mostly anxiety and depression. So we answer questions like, when do people choose to end their friendships? Why do they choose to end their friendships? Does that look different for early teenagers than for people who are in their 20s? I'm really interested in sibling relationships. So what kind of interactions do siblings have? How does that contribute to well-being over the lifespan? So we answer a lot of questions like that. And one of the most exciting things for me about the work we pursue is that you actually need to be really good at math, which is something that I think a lot of people don't think about when they get interested in psychology. But we have to use a lot of really fancy statistics to answer our questions, because we have lots of crunchy problems, like kids are nested in groups together, and then they look more similar than kids who are in 2 different groups. And it turns out that makes it harder to answer your question. So I also am here to say, I think everybody should know how to code, and that those skills will only benefit you if you want to pursue graduate training in basically any discipline. We use those skills all the time to set up experiments and to analyze our data.
Thank you, Melanie. We'll now hear from Rebecca.
Hi, everyone. It's great to be here, and I feel very honored to be included in such a tremendous group of women. So I appreciate the invitation. My name is Rebecca Frey. I am the Chief Operating Officer of Evolve Immune Therapeutics. I am a doctor of pharmacy by training, and so I trained to be a clinician, but I early in my career moved into the field of drug development. I've spent most of the last 20 years in companies. More recently in smaller and smaller companies, and getting closer to the the core of how companies are created and how they are built, which is really fun. Evolve Immune is focused on discovering and developing novel therapies for cancer. And it's a bit of a passion project for me, having, like many people, having had cancer affect my family. And we are really focused on trying to make breakthrough discoveries in terms of new therapeutics. So my world is sort of focused on a small group of people, less than 20 employees, building out a lab, building out capabilities to do biologic discovery work, as well as designing and engineering and testing therapeutics, biologic therapeutics. I am very passionate about math and science. Like Melanie, my day-to-day life is constantly using these skills, and across all aspects of drug development, there are so many opportunities to bring the skill sets of not just coding, of analytical, statistical analysis. It's really a data-driven field. So I think it's a very exciting area for women to consider. And, I think later in the conversation, I can also try to explain how I jumped from the clinical side to the development side. But, it's a great place to be. And I am very purpose-driven. I think, and I suspect we all are, but my purpose is really about bringing drugs to the clinic that are going to benefit society. And so everything we do, rises from that purpose, and that's what, inspires me to go to work every day. So.
Thank you. So wow, we really have a fantastic group of women here today. So I'd love to hear from each of you a bit about your professional journey and what else did it take for you to get to where you are today. All three of you are in such fantastic positions, and we'd love to hear how that came about. Starting again with Anna.
Okay. Well, as probably is true for everyone's career, it's never as you originally plan it, and it's much more of a meandering path with ups and downs and turning different corners. My path actually started at the very, very beginning, started with me growing up in Greece, actually. I grew up bilingual because we lived in England with my parents for a few years, and then I attended an English-speaking school. And then I had an opportunity to come to the United States to go to college, which was just a completely eye-opening, life-changing opportunity for me. I ended up going to Harvard College, like you, Kemi, and I will also not disclose how many years ago I graduated, although it's very easy to find. And then I had the opportunity to go to Harvard Medical School and pursue an MD and PhD degrees. I thought for a long time, and my PhD is actually in neuroscience because I studied primarily ion channels in the brain. I thought I would become a neurologist. And then when I went into the clinic, I realized that that field was not as appealing to me as I thought. And so that was one of the major kind of changes on my path, if you will. I decided to go into internal medicine. I ultimately specialized in the kidney. And the reason for that decision was actually scientifically driven. There were these ion channels that I had previously studied in the brain, which turned out to be important because there were human mutations that affected these channels that caused kidney disease. So they were important actually in the kidney. And so that was sort of an eye-opening scientific realization that led me down a different path. And that's why now, I'm focusing a lot of my lab's efforts in developing new treatments for kidney diseases. But in doing so, we have now made new discoveries in the kidney that are leading us back to the eye and the brain and other work that we're doing in the diabetes space. So this is, again, to try to say that, I thought when I was, in high school or even in college that my career would have a certain trajectory. And now, a lot of what I do is not as I had initially predicted it, but so rich and so wonderful, nevertheless. I trained both as a clinician, so kind of the full training as a clinical doctor, but really always with a passion for science in the background and sort of asking the questions why, which basically led me back to the lab and the balance that I have now had in my career in terms of spending, maybe 15% of my time doing clinical work and really the rest of my time devoted to research. So, what else can I say? Somewhere along the way, I had 2 kids, and ended up with a divorce early on in my life, but then was very lucky to meet my husband, who brought 2 more kids into the marriage. So I have 4 kids, 2 sons and 2 daughters. And it's been just a tremendous journey. My family life is just as rich as my work life. And, I couldn't feel luckier. So I'll stop there and see what other questions or discussions we might have.
Thank you, Anna. I will now hear from Melanie.
So I'm looking at the sort of the way the question was phrased, and it wants me to start early with what I was interested in K to 12. So I liked everything. I was one of those students who could not pick. I took all the math, all the science. I love literature. I like to write. And so when I went to university, I actually went into this liberal arts program that was designed to give students exposure to sort of the major components of the humanities, but also sort of a core of science, so that if you wanted to go to medical school or to pursue a path like that, you would have all the prereqs taken care of, and you would also sort of have a basic introduction to scientific training at that level. So I did that, and then I majored in psychology. And I actually decided I wanted to go to graduate school when I was working at a summer camp for kids from economically disadvantaged families. And what was interesting to me about this was not so much working with the kids, which I liked, but what was really interesting to me was actually, I kept wondering if this was actually doing anything for them. Like if was this actually promoting well-being? And given how much money this was costing, it was a major charitable foundation, it was millions of dollars. Given how much money was being invested, was this really the best place to spend this money, or will we be better investing it sort of into other avenues, like for example, after school programs that they could go to all the time in their communities at home? And so, one of my advisors was like, that's the kind of question you could answer in a PhD in psychology. So I said, okay, that's what I'm going to do. So I applied and I got into Yale to do that. And as I started, one of the things that happened to me was I started it with very applied interests. And as I kept moving, and it sounds like actually maybe this happened to Anna too, I got more and more interested in more and more basic questions, where I got really interested in how do we actually know what a good outcome is for kids? How do we measure that? Which is a much more fundamental question than the one I started out to answer. And so as I sort of got dug in on that, I got more and more interested in pursuing an academic career where I would spend my time answering those questions. So when I started, I very much saw sort of getting a PhD as a way of going into policy or working clinically. And as I moved through, I was like, no, I want to answer questions all day. And I pursued a path that would let me do that, and that sort of put me into my current position.
Thank you, Melanie. Rebecca?
So yeah, I grew up in Connecticut, where I actually currently based as well, in a small town. I was always interested in math and science when I was in school in K-12. But when I was 15, I got my first job, and it was at a pharmacy. It was at a small community pharmacy. And I loved it. I was just fascinated by, I needed to understand, what the medications were for. I got to appreciate the relationship between the pharmacist and the patient, and the counseling and the support that comes from those relationships. And I was a first generation college student, so I didn't have a lot of guidance from the people around me about careers and things. It was just sort of like, you're really good at math and science. This is a great field. And I had this experience, and I thought this would be perfect for me, So I went to Northeastern University, pharmacy. By that time, it's sort of become a 6-year entry-level degree. So you go for 6 years to receive a doctorate. And I was pretty naive. I didn't know much about all of the other things that pharmacists do. It took me a couple of years to get up to speed. Northeastern has a co-op program, so I got to work in a lot of hospitals and community pharmacies. And then I really became interested in other things. And I would say the theme for me is that I'm just always attracted to complexity. So as I got into it and started to understand clinical medicine and pathophysiology and healthcare system, I became more interested in getting into that and into the process of that, and spent a lot of my rotations in critical care, organ transplantation, bone marrow transplantation. And towards the end of my my PharmD program, I was working with a faculty member who was tenure track, who was doing translational pharmacology research. So she was exploring drug metabolism and testing in healthy volunteers in a local hospital. And I started helping her with some of those studies, and that just opened up a whole new world for me of how drugs are developed and how they are evaluated in human systems. And then I started helping her with some clinical trials that she was running, and really it changed everything for me. I just became very focused on wanting to understand how to go from idea to, again, a transformative therapy that changes medicine and changes health. And so that direction became pretty clear right at the end of my my 6 years. So I did a postdoc with her to continue some research and taught for a little while, but I quickly went to a large pharma company so that I could learn. And that's the best thing about going to large companies. There's a lot of training, a lot of exposure, and I did that for many years, and went across running clinical trials and then working in medical affairs, where there was more of a communication aspect and working more directly with physicians and thought leaders around designing clinical trials. So that was, you know, kind of how I got to this field. And then as I got into it, and I went to a smaller company that was very entrepreneurial, and created a lot of opportunities for learning across different domains of the company. And again, that complexity to me, all of a sudden I was like, I want more. I want to learn how this company runs. I want to learn how we get this drug, you know, launched in 30 countries. I want to understand the regulatory process in every country. So I came to realize that I'd be happiest as a generalist who was kind of connecting the dots across the organization and building the strategy of how to get something from, again, a concept into the clinic, into the market, and, you know, becoming a leader in those capacities. And that's what's led me to sort of now kind of running, you know, many aspects of smaller organizations that are trying to develop new therapies. So it's entirely not what I expected. And I feel bad because when I was in high school, I promised that the pharmacist, I was going to come back. You know, it's like, I'm going to come back to my hometown. I'm going to work here, but you know,
I'm sure you're forgiven.
It's still a happy ending, right? Because I discovered so much by getting to college. You know, I discovered this whole world around everything around health sciences that I had no clue about, and also understanding, you know, the medical side, the physical therapy side, the nursing side, the delivery side. You know, it was just really tremendous experience, and you know, I think I have no remorse, no regrets about the path that I've taken. It's just about finding new challenges and making sure that you feel like you're making a difference, and so that's definitely how I feel.
Thank you guys so much. So you all talked about this a little bit, how you had different interests and kind of the journey that you took, as the last question alluded to get to where you are today. But from our perspective, we'd love to hear if there was any aha moment where you really realized that you wanted to pursue this field, even if you weren't sure if you were necessarily quote unquote good at that field yet, but you just knew that this was something you're passionate about. And that could be a moment or a mentor. I know, Rebecca, you mentioned being able to work with individuals helped, you know, ingrain your interests. So would love to hear if there was an aha moment where you knew that you wanted to dedicate your lives to this, really. We'll start with Anna.
Okay. I mean, I would say that it's probably a series of aha moments, and really speaking to the theme of our discussion today, I think it is about bravery rather than perfection. Certainly in my experience, this has been true. Seeking perfection, you know, is something that to some extent, it is fair to say I was raised to think about a lot. And that's certainly a part of me, but somewhere along the way, I realized that it's going to have to be about being brave and plunging into something unknown, and that I actually found that thrilling on some level, even if also scary, of course, you know, and that the ability to sort of do that over and over and be, you know, often reinforced about the fact that that was a good choice and I was able to use that as a stepping stone and succeed, I think really helped me understand that it's really more about the bravery than it is about achieving perfection, which is ever elusive anyway. You know, it's really, really hard to achieve perfection. And so, you know, several aha moments. I already, you know, alluded a little bit to the idea of sort of switching career paths, sort of an aha moment that I didn't really feel well suited to one sort of clinical direction and pursued another. Aha moments about, you know, pursuing a certain scientific direction, even though I didn't know much about it, was another one of those times. I think that there's you know, our careers are probably a series of these kind of moments where you're hitting a fork and you have to make a decision as to whether to go down some perhaps more familiar path, achieving that perfection because you can control it better, you know the parameters better, versus choosing a path that you know less about. And I think I've often made that choice, again, not with some, you know, certainly with some trepidation, but it's been richly rewarding. And so I've learned that these, it's not just about aha moments, but also moments of sort of catching yourself and saying, okay, I'm going to be brave and I'm really going to do that. And that's been, you know, tremendously rewarding for me at every step of the way. So.
Thank you. Melanie?
Yeah, so I actually have a very like specific crystallized aha moment in my career trajectory where, as I said, I had worked at this summer camp for kids from low-income families, and I was really interested in that and really interested in how we could promote healthy development. And at the same time, I had also done a year-long research practicum with a psychiatrist in a hospital, and I was sort of starting to get interested in the research process. So I sort of had these two kind of competing pathways going. And I had to take required for my major, I had to take a psychology laboratory course. And we learned about research methods in psychology. And the way they had taught this, they were teaching this, they had 4 professors teaching it and they had split it up between them. And one of these classes, it was a night class, which is something you will get to enjoy at university. It was a night class. And one of these nights, a psychiatrist named Dan Offord came to guest lecture that night. And Dan Offord was the architect of what at the time was the largest study, epidemiological study of childhood psychopathology in Canada. So he was the person who figured out, for example, how many kids in Ontario actually have major depression. And when he did that, nobody in Canada had done anything like, there was a few studies in the States, but nobody in Canada had done anything like that. And he came in, and this is true, he was wearing sweatpants. We were not in a pandemic. He was wearing sweatpants and a sweatshirt. And he came in and he started putting up these figures and showing how we could understand, you know, about how kids have psychopathology and how kids who lived in low-income environments were at greater risk for having psychopathology. And my mind was just blown by this. And I remember I was like, I want to do that. Like that is what I want to do. I want to be like Dan Offord, which was a very large ambition because he was an extremely important person. But that's what I wanted to do. And I sort of, at that point, put myself on that path. And I like the way this story ends up because it turns out that when I did my postdoctoral fellowship, I did it at the center that was now named for Dan Offord. And I'm actually an investigator on this study that is the follow-up to his first study. So I came full circle on that, but I can trace sort of the whole thing back to one moment in a class. And I teach a lot of undergraduates now. So I've taught more than 10,000, I think, at this point. And I try to always remember this moment because I never met Dan Offord and he has no idea that he had this much influence on me. And so I try to always keep in mind when I'm teaching that there might be somebody out there who is really looking to me or really listening to me and is going to take that in a direction that I never would have expected.
Thank you, Melanie. Rebecca?
Yeah, so I think my response is kind of, I want to tie in as Anna did, the sort of the theme here. Drug development is a field that has a lot of failure. It is very difficult to be successful in everything you do in drug development. It's inherent to the process. And so you learn early on that you're disappointed a lot, no matter how much you want something to work. Oftentimes it doesn't because that's biology, or even worse, that's immunology, which is really hard. So I think for me, the first time that I got data from a study that I had been, deeply involved in designing and planning and executing and facilitating, and the data that came out positive, and that showed, in this case, it was a significant reduction in organ transplant reduction in kidney transplant patients, a study that we did at the Mayo Clinic. And the thrill that was coming from the surgeons about what a difference this was going to make for their patients, and the thrill of seeing it presented at a Congress, as abstract number one. And I still wasn't sure if it was going to make it to market, which actually it didn't. But that small success, it's like something you wait a long time for in drug development. And for me, I had learned up until that point that you have to be pretty resilient. You have to be prepared that things don't go the way you want them to, or that no matter how much you think the hypothesis lines up, it may not translate to humans. But that if we don't have these pursuits, there's no advancement, and that you have to keep at it to finally get to that point where something does work. And that's how medicine progresses in terms of the therapeutics. So, I think I was more than 6 years into my industry career before that even happened. And a lot of the things I worked on before that, didn't make it. But it was so personally fulfilling to have that success. And I think for me, it was clearly a turning point that I knew that this is what I was going to continue doing. Down the road, the learnings about persistence and resilience, I always had to come back to that, because I've dealt with many very challenging programs. I've dealt with, pediatric programs that, are in devastating diseases where there is no treatment, but you try something and it doesn't work, and you have to go back to that community and tell them that there's nothing there. That's, really, really tough. But when you're successful and you meet patients who, especially children and patients with rare diseases whose lives are transformed by something you worked on, even in a small way, there's nothing more rewarding for me. And so I've had enough of those reinforcing forks where it went the right way, and I got to see my impact. And it's always just made me more passionate and more excited about, pressing ahead, keep going. But yeah, you have to handle a lot of failure in this field, and you learn a lot about yourself and about your teams when you fail. It's actually more important how you handle and how you accept that lack of perfection, and that you accept that you need to keep going in those situations. So
thank you, Rebecca. Now as we're going towards the second half, I'm going to have some more questions directed at individual panelists. So starting out with Melanie. So you've talked a lot about just your journey through this field, and now teaching 10,000 students, well, in total 10,000 students, hopefully not at once.
I actually was just looking, I think that's high. I've certainly taught thousands of undergraduates. I think
thousands of undergraduates.
Sorry, I was trying to do the mental math really fast. 10,000 times. I've taught thousands.
Thousands, that's still an extremely impressive number. And as we've mentioned in previous conversations, this field of psychology is often very skewed towards women, and then ends up skewing towards men once you get further into academia. So as you've gone through this process, how did you develop those skills and know that you were equipped just as much as anyone else around you to teach all these students and investigate these fields? And to be more specific on my end, did they come naturally to you, or were they skills you constantly had to work at, ask for help from? How did you bring it all together?
Oh, there's a lot of question there.
Yes, I'm so sorry.
No, it's okay. I'm just trying to think about how I'm gonna parse that up. So I will say, in terms of how did I know that I could do this, I think this is probably going to be a theme forever. There were certainly moments when I was like, I can't do this. And I remember when I very first started at McGill as an assistant professor, my first time teaching, I was teaching 150 students, developmental psychopathology. And I remember, I think literally after every lecture, I would call my own graduate school advisor, and I'd be like, I can't do this. And she was like, it's okay. She's like, and she would encourage me. And then of course, she was of course right, as she always is. And it did get better. And then I stopped calling because I wasn't upset after every class. And so eventually she called me and she was like, I'm assuming it's fine now. And I'm like, oh yeah, it's good. And so, but I think this sort of sense of, I can't, is a very normal feeling on any major transition point. So when you feel that, know that it's normal and that you will get used to it and it will pass. In terms of sort of having the confidence to keep going, I'm gonna say I was lucky in that I always had female mentors. So my undergraduate advisors were both women, my graduate advisors were both women. And so I had all these strong female role models who had, carved this path out in front of me. And so I could clearly see that this could be done. Because they were living this in front of me every day. And when I had questions about, I can't do it, or this happened, what do I do? I always had an abundance of women that I could call and who were happy to help me and happy to be supportive. And I think that was really helpful. And I try to remember that, like when I mentor my own students, that now they're going to be looking to me to be providing that kind of scaffolding and support for them.
Thank you. Now, Rebecca, I have a question for you. So you've mentioned you were a first-generation college student, and now you're working as a chief operating officer in a field that's often, has a lot of difficulties. Not everything can be perfect, as you mentioned. So what has inspired you to be brave and resilient? I know you mentioned this before, but particularly as a student who was a first-generation college student and now has reached this fantastic level in your field, how have you continued to keep going?
Yeah, I mean, I've had to make some adjustments. I think foremost it's my purpose. I just feel there's a part of me that just is so focused on patients and society at large, and that I want to contribute to benefiting those stakeholders. But also, my parents sacrificed a lot, and also didn't have the kinds of opportunities when they were growing up, and they worked really hard to make it possible for me to, have an education. And actually, I lost my mom in my second year of college to cancer. And I can tell you that I, wanted to give up at that point. It was really hard to go back to school. And also I had to really lower my own academic expectations because I was going back at a time when I was struggling with a lot of grief. And I went from being a pretty high performing student to, sometimes I'll be very honest with you, barely making it, because it was hard. It was a shocking, experience for me. But I know that my mom wanted me to keep going, and I never stopped hearing that voice, right? And so that's what motivated me to get through school. And I think of both my parents as reasons to continue pursuing my dreams, and also to build that foundation for my own kids. I have 3 children, and I have tried to teach them those same lessons and give them the opportunities and give others the opportunities. So it's really a personal motivation for me. That's what's kept me going. But I think it's important for people to understand that, stuff happens in life. And you can be hit by something unexpected like that, and it doesn't mean that you have to give up on whatever your passions are. You can get through it and find that support, find the people around you that can help you through it. But not to let go of those, especially if those are academic aspirations or career aspirations. That there's always a way through it. So.
Thank you so much for sharing that. I went through a similar experience with my dad, so honestly, hearing your words on that is inspiring to me as well, as I'm sure it is to all of our audience members. Now, Anna, I would love to hear about how your field has changed since you first got into it. I know you mentioned that you first were a bit into urology before focusing in on kidney research, and I think a majority of your lab is women. And sorry, it just said my internet connection's unstable.
You had a little lag, yeah, but that's okay. Yeah.
Okay, but did you hear the question?
Yes, something about how my field has changed since, is that sort of the
yes, the gender breakdown, and also just environment of your field. Sure. How's it changed?
Yeah, no, I think that's a really excellent question. So when I went to Harvard Medical School it was a Harvard MIT program called the HST program, Health Sciences and Technology program. I was one of 5 women in that program. It was a program of, I think 30 or 35 students at the time who were specifically interested in the sciences and technology. So learning medicine from that perspective of sort of quantitative sciences. So I was one of only 5 women in a class of 35, I believe. And I was also in the MD PhD program, one of 3 women in that program, out of a total of, I believe, 10 or 11 students. So now I have the opportunity to be part of the leadership council for the MD PhD program. And I'm delighted that after all the work we've done in the last 20 years, we now have equal numbers of men and women in the program. So that's already reflected in our student population, which is tremendous, and that was just giving you the sense of how, the field of sort of biomedical research has changed from that perspective. Now, that is not fully reflected all across the ranks. So I am presently an associate professor at the next level. Already at my level, there are more men than women at these ranks at Harvard and MIT and across the nation, both nations, Canada as well, I'm pretty sure. Once you get to the professor level, there are far fewer women still. Of course, over time, the numbers are bound to get better and better, as we have seen happen. It takes quite a while. And what it requires, I think, is stamina and persistence, right? So the gains we have made need to continue. That means that I need to continue to pay it forward. And of course, I try to do that. I told you that the numbers are well reflected in my own group, not on purpose. This is not some kind of, if you will, affirmative action for women per se in my program, but more because, naturally by leading this program, I attract people to work with me. And of course, I'm open to anyone who's talented, no matter where they're coming from and what their backgrounds are. I'm also very proud of the fact that we also have underrepresented minorities who have trained in my group, quite a few. So far, we've had 7 in the 8 years that my lab has been in existence, 7 Black and Latino students. Almost all of them also first college goers in their families. So it's just been a tremendous opportunity for me to, help bring along the careers of others. And this is not just about mentorship. It is about sponsorship. That involves me picking up the phone and making opportunities available to people who work with me. And I do this all the time. And to translate this into what would be relevant here, bravery also is translated into picking the right person to work for who is going to be a sponsor for you. It is also asking them to sponsor you in a direction that you feel is important, because sometimes, I may not be aware of an opportunity that someone in my group would like to pursue, but if I know about it, I will do everything I can to help them get there, And so I think that there's a lot of, you asked me about how the field is changing. It's changing in the right direction in terms of bringing, equality to be reflected across all the ranks, from our students all the way up to the faculty. But it requires this ongoing stamina, persistence, and bravery on behalf of everyone, both the mentees as well as the mentors, to really be able to pursue that. And in the math and sciences, computational sciences, we are far from there, even with our trainees. But girls who code, we need to have more of those in the biological and biomedical sciences, because increasingly we're using those kind of approaches to analyze our data. Our data are increasing in complexity. So, the more of all of you out there who I could convince to, be recruited into the fields of my interest, I think the better, because we absolutely need you. And, I would say that I would do my part to make that possible. And then the only other thing that I wanted to say on this theme, I think, is I mentioned earlier, I have 2 girls and 2 boys. And I often say this because when I think about, the progression in our fields in STEM and women in STEM, I almost have sort of a perfect experiment going on in my own home. Of course, the sample size is very, very small, but nevertheless, it's been interesting to see, my husband and I aim to socialize all of our children in the same way. But the cues that our girls receive from school or society at large, as compared to our boys, are quite different. And it's very interesting to see, despite having, for example, me as a mother and a role model, they also receive many different signals from different places. And I think that it's really important for the girls to silence some of those voices who may be pushing you into more traditional ways of thinking about yourself or what you're meant to do in life. all of us are meant to do what we want to do, and we should all be brave to pursue what we want to pursue. There should be no specific expectations about what girls or boys should do in their lives or in their careers. And so it's very interesting for me to kind of observe those things as we go along, and to really, think about what could we be doing to mentor people at a younger age. So part of me participating in this is because I feel that I should try to pass this message along to people in high school. I actually also think that kids in elementary school should be hearing this about being free to choose STEM fields and feel supported in doing so. So I think that there's important work that we still need to do to bring more equality into the field, but we are well on our way. So I'd like to end sort of on a positive note that it's completely doable and we can get there.
Thank you so much, Anna. So I've already learned a tremendous amount. Apologies, hopefully my internet is better now. But yes, I've learned a tremendous amount, so I'm going to hand it off to the Q&A. So answering one of the questions, one question we had from Asha is, what is a common mistake that girls who are entering the STEM field make, and how would you recommend they avoid it? So let's get started. I know we only have about 14 minutes left, so if you limit your answers to a bit shorter, that would be wonderful, just so we can get to some of the other questions as well. But to repeat, a common mistake in entering STEM fields for women and how to avoid it. And we can get started with Rebecca, since Anna, you just spoke.
Well, I would pick up on the theme that Anna just brought up about signals. I think earlier in your career, you do get some additional signals at times about what you can and can't do. And I think a mistake is to internalize those things. When I was early in my career and I was at a large pharma company, and I got assigned a mentor, and I told that person what I want to do, and they said, well, you'll never do that. And I took that to heart. It took me a few years to figure out that person didn't know what they were talking about. So don't internalize those signals. Be confident in what you know, which is what you're hearing today. And if someone tells you something negative about that, don't listen to them. I mean, just move ahead, move on, keep going. Don't be discouraged because there's still some of that will be at play, and it's in your control to avoid taking those messages to heart.
Thank you. Melanie?
I think sort of two thoughts. So for lots of really smart people, school feels really easy. And at some point, it will become a challenge. And at what point it becomes a challenge is different for different people, right? So for some people, they'll tell you about like math was really easy until they got to calculus. And when the first time they hit calculus, they were like, oh, that's hard now. I'm not getting that immediately. And there will be other people who are probably conducting Nobel Prize worthy work before they found it to be challenging. But at some point it will become a challenge. Don't be put off when it becomes a challenge. So especially I think, I don't have data, this is anecdata, but I've noticed that for women who are often socialized to be perfect, when it starts to feel hard and you don't get it immediately, and it actually requires some significant struggle to figure out the material or to get there, I think there's a tendency to back off and say, well, I'm not good at this. That's not true. Many people who are really good at biochemistry, at advanced math, at differential functions, had trouble the first time they ran into it. It doesn't mean you're not good. It means you actually have met a challenge worthy of you for the first time. So lean in on it. Don't back away at that moment. So that's one thing I think I see a lot of female trainees doing, right? It's the math, the stats gets hard and they're like, I can't do this. And then you can. It's time to lean in and to really dig on that. So I think that's kind of one major piece of advice I would give people. I think the second major piece of advice I would give people is surround yourself with the best people possible. So I think one of the things that can also be hard for people who've been conditioned to think about perfection is that you'll come out of high school and maybe you were the best at high school, and then you're going to go to university and you're going to go to a place like Harvard or a place like Yale or a place like Berkeley or McGill, and you probably won't be the best because everybody can't be the best. So, but that's actually good, because when you're not the best, it means you're surrounded by people who are really good and they're going to push you and they're going to take you in new directions. So don't let that fear of not being the best or not being perfect put you off putting yourself in a peer group who's going to take you places you could never even dream of, right? So when I went to undergraduate, the people I was in university with were unbelievable. And at first it was really scary. And now I'm just so glad that I spent 4 years with those amazing people who helped me get somewhere really interesting myself.
Thank you, Melanie. I love that term you used, anecdata. I hadn't heard that before.
I always, as a psychologist, whenever I give examples like this, I just always like to be clear that I actually do not have any systematic data.
But love the term regardless. And Anna?
Oh, I think we've sort of well covered this. I would say that also looking at the Q&A, maybe to kind of add on to another question that seems to some way related. How do you deal with being uncomfortable? Is one of those questions. And adding on to, it is a mistake to stop something because it's challenging. You should lean in, as Melanie said. I think that really resonates with me. And also the idea of surrounding yourself with smart people, of course. But furthermore, this idea of being uncomfortable. I say to the people on my team, and I include myself in that as well, if we are not uncomfortable, we're not innovating enough. So we need to always be a little bit uncomfortable. If you're too comfortable, that means you're not doing things that are as interesting as they could be. And again, I think that this idea of how sometimes young women and girls are socialized, this idea of, you somehow should not pursue the uncomfortable things, but rather you should, pursue things that you're more kind of in control of. Like you should, your behavior must be controlled, you must be proper and prim, and you should not do uncomfortable things. I reject that completely, and I've seen it play out again in my children. This is not the way that either girls or boys should be raised. You should pursue the uncomfortable things, and you should lean into them because that's where you're going to learn. And sometimes you'll fall flat on your face doing that too, and that's okay, because in those times there will be learning from those times when things did not succeed, and then you'll move forward. I mean, in the work that I do, just like Rebecca mentioned, there's a lot of failure. 9 out of 10 experiments don't work. And so you have to sort of have the stamina to continue to lean in until you find the solution. So it's always important to be uncomfortable and to not be afraid to make those mistakes, because there's learning in all of it and great success on the other side.
Thank you, Anna. So another question we have from Asha is, I guess this is all very common in different fields when it comes to innovation and being unique. How can you, when you're in a field, for example, Melanie, in psychology, when you're in a field with many different researchers and people doing research, how can you, stay unique and innovative and differentiate yourself from others who are working on, similar disciplines?
Okay, so I'm muted. Okay, so I mean, it's a huge challenge, especially if you're working in a field that's crowded and where there's lots of people sort of pursuing questions and pursuing answers. So one way is just to stay on top of what's going on, so sort of what the major discoveries are. And one of the things that happens is you figure out pretty fast who the other groups are who are working on topics like yours, and you track their work and you know what they're doing and you keep track of it. But I actually think, I just actually want to highlight how much I love that Anna switched from doing neuroscience to working on kidneys, because the ion channels that she was working on in the brain turned out to be highly relevant for kidney functioning. And I just want to say that it's that kind of bravery that drives innovation, right? So many people want to stick in the comfort zone of what they know, right? So like a place where I see this happening a lot in my field, because I'm a developmentalist, is I see people who work with adults and they actually pick up on a construct or on an idea, and it would be really interesting to know about how that develops over the lifespan. But that would then require working with kids. And working with kids, if you've never done it, is a challenge, right? So you have to ask your questions in different ways. You have to learn a different literature. It's a whole different way of working. But one of the things I love is when people are brave enough to take that leap, because we get really interesting advances when we're driven by what the science is telling us, rather than by what feels comfortable, sort of based on how we've trained or what we know. And so I just wanted to highlight how much I loved that answer, because I think it's that kind of bravery. It's saying, this is where the science is taking me, right? The science is saying that it's time for me to leave the brain and head to the kidney, and learning like an entirely new body part and system. I'm not an MD, as I've just revealed to everyone. Learning an entirely new body part is like, that's really, I mean, you would have been with people probably who had spent their whole career studying the kidney, and you got to go from scratch. And it's extraordinary. But I think led to probably really interesting advances that only happened with this kind of translational work.
Thank you so much, Melanie. And we're going to
Thank you, Melanie.
The big Zoom thumbs up on that, because I thought it was so great. But
Thanks.
We're going to take one more Q&A question and then one more moderated question. I'd love to direct this at Rebecca. So as a COO in your field, this question asks, quote, how do you deal with males that might be intimidated, or just generally people who might be intimidated in your day-to-day work environment at your position?
You know, I try to develop meaningful relationships with everybody. And, you know, it takes a different amount of time with different people. But particularly if I sense that there's some level of competition or intimidation, I really reach out, because I just prefer to see everybody as a partner. And I don't see my own success. I see the success of my organization as what drives me. So I think it's all about building camaraderie. And anyone on my team, I want them to feel like we know each other well, we have each other's backs. I think that helps break down those feelings of intimidation, or I view it more, I think, as in the lens of competition, you know. You know, it's not that hard. It's effort. You have to make the effort to build those relationships. And to lead by example and say, well, I'm going to behave in a way that shows that I elevate people around me, and I support and sponsor people that need opportunities, and I'm not a selfish leader. And I think the more you show that, the more these types of dynamics sort of go away. So I think that's sort of my advice, is building relationships.
Thank you, Rebecca. And so as we're entering the last few minutes of the panel, I want to thank you all so much, but also give this opportunity for any closing thoughts or advice to the young women and just generally people in our audience, as well as myself, for navigating just the world of STEM in your position. So any closing thoughts? We can start with Anna.
Well, one of my heroes, maybe I should end with that. People who know me well know this. I am somewhat obsessed with Marie Curie as one of my sort of superheroes. And when I used to go, my kids are older now, but when I used to go into their elementary school classrooms, I would say, you know, I know that you guys like, you know, Batman and Superman, but my superhero is Marie Curie. And I would sort of put up a picture. I would buy a poster of Marie Curie and give it to each of their science teachers to post it in the classroom. Because there's often pictures of Albert Einstein and Niels Bohr on the walls, but not often of people like Marie Curie. So she was a remarkable scientist. She's the only human being to have 2 Nobel Prizes in 2 different scientific fields, chemistry and physics, to date. So not even just the first woman to receive a Nobel Prize, but just an amazing scientist overall. And the reason that she's such a superhero for me is because she really represents what I think is at the crux of what Girls Who Code and, you know, young women in bio should always be keeping as mission central. And I think that is the courage to continue. She grew up in a time when there were hardly any women. It was unheard of to do science. And she persisted and rose to the higher echelons of the scientific enterprise through lots of personal adversity. And she made amazing contributions that are still to this day, things that have changed humanity. So what could be more inspiring than that? So I just want to leave you with, maybe you should go and look up more about her biography if you don't know it already, and just really think about, you know, imagine putting yourself in her shoes and what drove her, and draw from that courage and that bravery in your own endeavors. And I'm so grateful for the opportunity to be with you today. Thank you.
Thank you, Anna. Melanie?
Can I actually answer a question that I see in the chat?
Yes, feel free to.
Okay.
Unfortunately, we're mainly at the
It's
Q&A.
not a problem. It's just this one resonated for me, and I want to make sure that we just. And I also think this could be a place for girls who code. So Lisa K wanted to know what to do if you're not surrounded by the best people. So what if you're in a high school that's not as strong, or you have science teachers who aren't really interested or aren't very inspiring or very motivating? What do you do then? Right? And so I think that is such an important question. And so, Kemi, I'm wondering if that is a place where Girls Who Code can help, which is why I wanted to highlight this here. But I also wanted to say, so you got to do your best where you're at, but also as you get older, hopefully you get more agency and you can change it, right? So I didn't go to the strongest high school, but I did have I had a number of really excellent teachers and one truly amazing teacher who actually had a PhD in organic chemistry and who thought I had talent and really encouraged me. And then, you know, when I went to university, I was fortunate to have a little more choice about where I got to go. And I got to go to this really great program that was a liberal arts program. So it doesn't have to be everybody, but if you can find one person who really sparks an interest for you or who knows something about what you want to do, talk to that person, right? So try to find a mentor where you are. And then again, think about sort of, is there ways that how you could pursue what you want to do down the road? And then I think an organization like Girls Who Code can be really fantastic for connecting with new peers and new mentors outside of sort of the immediate environment where you find yourself. And so I just wanted to highlight that question so that Kemi, possibly you could actually say something about that.
I think Emily could perhaps at the end could add more precision to it, because I definitely have a lot of thoughts from my experience, but Emily's the expert on things. But definitely, Lisa K, your question.
Yeah, and I also just wanted to thank Lisa for asking that question, which is really, really important.
Yes, yeah, and thank you for pointing that out. And I think as we're going over time, there's such great questions that are being asked, but I just want to end with Rebecca on any closing thoughts, or if there was a question that you wanted to add more thoughts to as well.
I would just end by saying that all of the fields that we represent today need more representation of women from all walks of life. So I just want to continue to encourage your audience to find out about different career pathways. Don't feel like you have to know at the beginning what your end is going to be. You're going to evolve. Listen to how we've all evolved in our careers, and I still feel like it's just a work in progress. You don't have to know where you're going to end, but don't be afraid to step into it. Get comfortable with the words "I don't know," and own it, and have a learning mindset as you pursue these things. But you can be very successful and build so many different, very rewarding and very lucrative and exciting and fulfilling careers in STEM. And I feel inspired by listening to my colleagues here today. And I wish I had had this type of information when I was younger. So I think this is very important what we're doing. And I just encourage everybody to not hold back on those aspirations. Thank you.
Fantastic. Well, thank you all three of you so much for joining us today. I learned a tremendous amount as now old college graduate, and so I'm sure all of the other attendees today have also learned a lot. I just also want to particularly thank Young Women in Bio and Girls Who Code for hosting this event. We hope all of you are just inspired as these women have been in their field and as I am today to ignite your bravery and your resilience in pursuit of your passions. And to those questions that weren't asked, make sure to save them, because there will be many other opportunities through Girls Who Code or Young Women in Bio, or even in your classes to get these questions answered. So as has been alluded to, stay inquisitive, keep these questions close to heart, and I wish you the best of luck in all your pursuits. So without further ado, I think that ends our panel. I'm not sure if I can hear anyone, but I'll applaud the panelists. I'm not sure if anyone else can be heard, but yes, so unless there are any other questions.
I'll just have a quick lasting thought. Thank you so much, Kemi, for moderating our panel today. It was such a fantastic discussion. I know I've learned a lot from each of you as well, and just wanted to share with our viewers today to thank you. We will be sending out the recording afterwards, so keep an eye out for your emails. And for those of you too who also had some additional, questions and thoughts about how to get involved or what else to do or how to find mentors and all of those really important questions. Keep us in mind. We will send you emails and share with you further, information on how to get involved. With that, I'm going to pass it off to Lily as well from Young Women in Bio. I'm adding her back on now to share her video to say a few lasting words before we end off.
Great, thank you very much, Emily. I appreciate that. I'm glad you saw me. Thank you. I also wanted to thank all three of our panelists and Kemi as well. Thank you so much for joining. We at Young Women in Bio, we really try to encourage young girls in STEM, and we have a lot of activities, including now our YWeb Online, YWeb Teachers, and YWeb Showcase platforms. And so we continue to look forward to opportunities to work with you. I thought you were fantastic, and I hope that people took to heart what you had said, because I thought it was really heartfelt and I learned a lot myself, so thank you. And thanks to Emily and Girls Who Code and Kemi as well.
Thank you all, and we'll talk soon. And with that, we'll see you all next time.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Thank you.